Let's now use our model. And as for the places where we started with creating a new place, so with creating a document, we have to follow the same approach right here. So first, we should have a look at the create process, creating a new document, meaning we should have a look at the user sign up here, so to create a new user. For that, we go to the user's controller and now first import our newly created user model right here. So we use a new constant named user, which is equal to our path. So this is /models/user. Now we can use the user model and we'll work on get users later. But here, our signup constant, this is where we have to change some code now. The first code block, so this part right here, is okay. We'll come back to that later though, because we have to adjust a little thing, but this is not important at the moment. But here, our has user constant, the created user, and how we add the new user. These are the areas we have to change now. Let's start with this has user constant here. Here we have some kind of dummy validation already to check whether a user email exists already. With our newly created user model, this whole logic does not apply anymore, so let's change it here. But one important note. As I said before, we have a validation already in here with our unique validator package. The little issue about this package is that we get a default validation. This means we get an error message in case the email exists already, but it might be a very technical error message. So to make sure we have a nicer user experience, we should add a manual validation logic right here. This means we will get rid of this code right here. And now let's say this is our existing user. And this should be equal to user. So our user model dot, and now how can we check whether an email exists already? Well, with the find one method here. Find one simply finds one document matching the criteria in the argument of our method. And what would be the criteria in our case? Well, it would be the user email. So with that, we can easily check if the email of the user exists already. So as with save or find as we had it before, this right here is again what? Well, an asynchronous task, and therefore we of course should wrap this in our try catch code block like this. And this also means we cannot use a constant right here due to block scoping. So we add let existing user right here and get rid of the constant. Additionally, we have to add async up here and await ahead of our user. So this was step one. Now we check whether an email exists already. If checking this doesn't work, so not if we find an email, but just if this find one method does not work as intended, then we want to catch any potential errors and store it in an error constant. For new HTTP error, we did this a lot of time already. As I said, we could refactor the code a bit, but for demonstration purposes, I rewrite this code again. And we could say that signing up failed. Please try again later. With an error code of 500. And we also have to return next error. So let's now say we find a user email already, so the user exists. Well then, if existing user, so if this is true in the end, then I want to create another error, new HTTP error here, and I want to return user exists already, please log in instead. And the error code here would be 422. And we want to return next error to stop the code execution. One side note here, you can argue whether you want to expose the information right here so that the user exists already. You can also be more cryptic here and say login failed. I think for a better user experience at this point, we should give the user the information that the user is existing already. Let's now finally say we don't have an existing user, so creating a new user is possible. Well, then we are at this code block, and again, as we did it for our places, just to remind you down here in the places, we now have to make sure that we add all the properties we created in our user.js file. So name, email, password, image, and places. Let's do this by, well, maybe getting rid even of these and creating it again from scratch. So let's now say that our created user should be a new instance of this class, of our user model in the end. And this should be the name which the user enters, the email the user enters, and an image. Again, the image should not be the file, but the URL to a file. I got a link to a file from the web here, again for demonstration purposes. It's exactly the same process that we followed when we used our places model. So we have this dummy image, then the user password right here. This is a user input. Another very important side note here. We will save the plain user password at this stage of the course, but very important, this is not the way to go here. At this point, we don't care, but later in the authentication module of this course, we'll of course encrypt the password here, because storing the not encrypted password is of course a serious security issue, so don't do it this way. This is just the right approach at this stage of the project. And finally, we add our places. As I said, places will be a dummy value for the moment, so just what the user adds as the place ID. Once the relation was set up, this will be a lot more dynamic. With that, we can create a new user actually. What is missing though is, how can we now save the user? For that, I'll again delete the dummy user's code here. And, well, for saving the data, what do we use? Well, we use again the save method. If we go to the places controller down here, that's actually exactly the code we need right here. And this time I will actually copy paste the code to speed things up a bit at this stage. Like this. So we await not the created place, but the created user at this stage. And we catch an error. And if this fails, we will simply say not creating place, but maybe signing up failed. Please try again later. Error code 500. So that's the same logic we had before. And here for our response, we'll again also use a well-known approach. So we will convert our Mongoose object, the created user, to a default JavaScript object. And we'll also set getters to true. What's the reason for that? Well, it removes the ID, so the underscore in front of the ID property, to make it easier to access the later ID. Very important here, what we get back as a response also includes the password. As I said, this is also not what you would typically do. It's just here for demonstration purposes at this stage of the project. And here we can actually make small u, not the capital U. So let's now restart our development server and go back to Postman, create a new post request here. Again, HTTP localhost 5000 /API /users this time, not places, and now /sign up to create a new user here. Now we need a body with JSON data once again. And here we have to add all the properties we added in our model. So first we need a name, which could be menu, my name here, an email, test@test.com. We don't need an image. We provided that in the code. So we need to add a password here. Maybe test should be a string. And we add the places as said before with the dummy input here. We'll change it later when we create the relation. So if I now hit send, and as we can see, we have a problem, but we actually have two problems. First, our request doesn't work. And second, we don't have an error message. So let's first check the problem with the error message here. Yeah, I got it. Yep, this is the problem. We are using throw here, but we are now in an asynchronous task. So this doesn't work. We have to use return next here to avoid this error. So let's put this in here. Now this should at least work. And we should also correct this for all our other cases where we have throw as part of an asynchronous task. For example, here in our places controller, I think we got the same problem. Yeah, down here for update place. Here we should also use return next. Oops. Like this. So with that, we also corrected this problem here. I don't think we have any other throw errors. So if we now go back to Postman and send the request, we at least get an error message that we passed invalid inputs. And the reason for that message now is, well, our password. You remember? Here, in our user model, we said that the password should have a minimum length of 6. Well, and our current password doesn't fulfill these requirements as we only have 4 characters in our password. So if we add 2 or 3 characters, let's say it should be testers, and hit send once again, then we are again in another loop. So that's the third problem we have. But what's this problem? Well, as we are using our dummy property for the places here, so this one in our schema, and also here in our model, we of course also have to add it right here to our constant. So if we add places right here, save this, go back to Postman and hit send, you can see we finally created our new user. We have the ID with our getters logic, we got the name, the email, and all our results. Again, we get back the password here. That's not the final implementation we will have. But if we now have a look at MongoDB, we should see that we have our places database, and in the users collection, we can find our newly created user. So with that, we can now create a new user. So the sign up is done. Now it's time to log in our user.